It's Rock coming to you from Sydney. It's actually Tuesday night here in Sydney. Charming weather outside, although we're in the Whisky Library, so the weather doesn't matter. Now, you probably know, obviously, that here at Whisky Library, we're an Australian channel. And, so far I've been doing reviews on Scotch whisky, some bourbon, and I thought, it makes a lot of sense that I would do more reviews on Australian whisky, because those of you watching from overseas are probably curious about the Australian whisky scene here. And in fact, it's actually massive. Probably just off here to my right is, I would call it the Australian whisky wall. And this particular wall is actually jam-packed with Australian whiskies. I don't know how many are here, but at least there has to be 100 different distilleries and whiskies here from all over the country. Tasmania, New South Wales, we've got Western Australia, South Australia. There's even a whiskey here from far north Queensland. But it would be remiss of me if I didn't review Australia's most famous whiskey export. Yes, you guessed it, 2014 World Whisky Award winner Sullivans Cove. We're going to review the American Oak second fill, so stay tuned. Oh, by the way, this review is for MyBottleShop.com, but if you're a liquor store or liquor bar and you want a whiskey review, reach out to us in the comments below. Okay, first up, a little bit of history about Sullivans Cove. After Lark, it would have been, I'd say, probably the second Australian whisky distillery based in Tasmania, like Lark. It started off in that sort of nascent period when, it's fair to say Australian whisky and distilling was a novelty. In fact, they even produced novelty bottles. I mean, you could say, I don't know, saying that's a novelty bottle is probably a bit unfair, but this bottle here of Sullivans Cove, honestly, look, I think I bought that in maybe the late 90s. It seemed like a curiosity at the time, because nobody had ever heard of Australian whisky. And Sullivans Cove during the 90s, they produced all sorts of things. Brandy, vodka, you name it, they produced it. This one's here, Storm Bay, produced at Sullivans Cove. So Sullivans Cove, for those of you who don't know, is a cove, for want of a better word, on the Derwent River in Hobart. Now, Sullivans Cove started off in that general vicinity, but has since moved on from there. And in fact, now they're up in, you could almost say an industrial estate in one of the suburbs of Hobart. They, like so many whiskey distilleries overall, Scotch whisky as well, had a lot of financial problems. And in fact, in the late 90s, they went bankrupt. And they were rescued. They were actually rescued partly by Bill Lark and his offside at Patrick Maguire in the late 90s and early 2000s. They brought Bill Lark on to say, look, help us out with this whiskey. We want to make a top quality product here, not a novelty whiskey. And they couldn't make it work again. So as it happened, Patrick Maguire ended up, along with other investors, buying out the distillery in sort of the early 2000s. And I'd just like to thank my friend Patrick there for a signed bottle that I picked up there at the distillery several years ago. And that's the American Oak. We'll talk about that in a minute. Sullivans Cove ticked along very nicely. And, like this problem with so many Scotch whisky distilleries, the problem is you've got to put the product down for so many years. So you lay down, you do all this effort, you lay down all this whiskey in the barrels, and you've got massive capital expenditure, you've got literally no income. And that, Sullivans Cove in the early years fell victim of that. And then, they plodded away with the input from Lark and then Patrick Maguire. you know, and he really had a single-minded focus to produce a really great whiskey. And then, of course, you know, we all know, well, certainly here in Australia, in the whiskey scene here in Australia, we all know the famous 2014 world's best whiskey. And actually, that was the French Cask 525 that was that the French Cask? Yes, that won the award. So that was the French. But you know, their core range sort of comprised the French Cask, this is the American Oak Cask, and the Double Cask, which is a combination of those two whiskies. So, but then, you know, the blue label, the French Oak Cask was the, you know, the big dog that won the awards and is their most highly sought after release from anything that comes out of the distillery. And nowadays, you know, if you want to buy Sullivans Cove whiskey, you've either got to go to an independent whiskey retailer, like, for example, our sponsor here, MyBottleShop.com, or you got to go into a ballot. So you sign up for Sullivans Cove, and they draw your number out of a hat to see if you won mind you, a very expensive bottle. You know, some of these bottles here sell for $500, $400, $300. So very expensive, you know, for the pleasure of buying the whiskies. Now, you'd ask anybody, they'd say, look, Australian whiskey, Sullivans Cove's #1. So what we're going to do today is we're going to review or crack open, or actually it's already cracked open, but anyway, we're going to review the Sullivans Cove American Oak Single Cask refill bottle. So this is a bit of a curiosity for Australian whiskey. So yeah, we're going to give this a bit of a taste test and see, you know, if it's any good, and see if Australia's managed to pull off the refill cask. So what is a refill cask, and why would you want to buy it? It's a good question, and there's been, I suppose, over the years, a lot of Scotch whisky distilleries have refilled their barrels, or you know, use it for a second maturation period. But you know, it hasn't really been done here in Australia. In fact, I don't know of another Australian whiskey distillery that's done the refill cask. And you know, when it first came out, actually, when this particular bottle, and you'll see it's sort of it's got the black of the American Oak type label color with the red sash across, which sort of says, hey, it's a refill cask bottle. But it's a bit, I think people, Australians, when this bottle first came out anyway, they were confused about it. And I said, well, you know, what's a refill cask? Why is it different from the American Oak bottle? So basically, the way that Sullivans Cove have expressed it is that normally they use the bourbon barrels. So your American Oak here will be a bourbon barrel. So, you know, you've got that vanilla sort of oak type flavor. But these refill bottles, they used virgin oak barrels from the 90s that they filled with an older batch of Sullivans Cove American Oak style. They decanted the whiskey out of the barrel, recharred the barrel, and then refilled it. And then in this particular case, the whiskey we're reviewing here is 15 years old. So you know, the whiskey sat inside that barrel for 15 years. Now the thing is, for people that are overseas, and maybe, you know, Australian viewers might be interested about this as well, is Australia's warmer in general, you know, hotter climate here, and so there's more evaporation that comes out of the whiskey barrels. So what happens is, you know, particularly small barrels we use here in Australia, we don't use big sherry butts or hogsheads. We use these little, you know, 200 litre barrels, or even smaller in some cases. And the whiskey evaporates out there quicker, so the angel share takes their fair share. And what happens is, a couple of things happen actually. The ABV here, unlike Scotland, it's almost the reverse. ABV goes down. Here in Australia, the ABV goes up the longer that it stays inside the barrel. And the other thing is, there's more concentration of the whiskey on the oak, because, you know, as the whiskey evaporates and the angels take their shares, less whiskey inside, it's more exposed to the oak components. And, you know, probably you'd say, unlike the big Scottish barrels, they're smaller barrels, so there is more sort of surface area to contact. So, you know, there's a challenging aspect of making whiskey here in Australia. In Tasmania, you know, it's got a temperate climate down there. I suppose you'd say in summertime it can get very hot, and in wintertime it can get very cold. Now that's good for the whiskey, because the whiskey's expanding and contracting along with the temperature changes, and you might argue that it imparts more flavour, and it's the reason why that there are more, or most of the Australian whiskey scene is down there in Tasmania. That's enough raving on about sort of the background to this whiskey. I don't know if many people have reviewed this second fill, but you know, Scotch whiskies have done that for years. Probably the reason is to you know, maybe make the most of the barrels, right? Scots being what they are, yes, tight. So there is in barrel, but the thing I suppose about it is you could argue that it softens the I suppose the oak influence. And Sullivans Cove like to use the analogy of a tea bag. So if you drink tea, you know, the first use of the tea bag, it's quite strong, astringent. You know, it's like high caffeine impact. Same story with the whiskey. The first fill of, say, your American oak here, which is on bourbon. So if it's bourbon, obviously they reuse bourbon barrels, unlike the virgin oak of these original ones, which aren't bourbon, but still made from American oak. This here will impart more flavour and more oak and more warmth, if that's what you're looking for. But the argument for Sullivans Cove and Scotch whisky distillers is, hey, if you want something a little bit more subtle flavour, then look for the refill cask. So let's have a look at I've got my Sullivans Cove Denver and Liley glass here, which is very lovely. I picked that up when I was in Tasmania in 2020. Now, this particular glass here allows us to aerate the whiskey, while at the same time, because of the conical design here, the wider base will focus the aromas of whiskey on our nose. But let's have a look at the colour first. I hope you can pick that up on the camera there. It's a bright brassy gold colour. So, you know, I perhaps would argue that it belies its 15 years of age. It looks a little bit younger in the glass, but it's got that nice brassy sort of gold to it. Now, normally, you know, if I was just sitting here in the whiskey library and drinking this, I put a small ice cube in there just to bring the temperature down a little bit. Summer here in Sydney, it's hot outside, hot, humid. I want to be able to enjoy the whiskey a little bit chilled down, but I don't want it to be diluted too much by the same token. Now, the percentage wise on this is, barrel number TD80, it's bottle number 251, and they made 425 bottles from this particular refill barrel. And it was filled on the 24th of February 2006 and decanted out into the bottles on the 6th of December 2019. So that doesn't make it 15 years old, I don't think. It's more like 13 years old. I don't know where the 15 came from. But anyway, for Australian whiskey, this is, you know, this is old. This is probably as old as you're going to get it. What's the only other choice? Maybe Lark. So if Australian whiskey, you've got a lot of age on that. So let's just swirl this around. I mean, I hate to say this, being an Australian, and God, Australians tend to be super critical on themselves more than anybody, other than Poms, of course. Go Australia and the Ashes. It has a, I don't want to say sulphur nose, but it's got that strong alcohol nose that's so reminiscent of all Australian whiskies that I've tried. It's bright. It's alcoholic nose. It really needs taming down. And it's hard. I honestly, I get that little bit of a funk coming out of this whiskey. I don't know whether it's because, this is a second fill. So it's been already had whiskey in it, and then you've filled it up again. I don't know the size of the barrel. It's 400 bottles, so it's 400, maybe 400 litres, taking into account the angel share. I get obviously the oak, sort of like a pineapple zing on the nose, to be honest. It's making my nose like a little bit itchy there, right? Sort of like a nougat sort of aroma. Once I breathe that in, I get past that first alcohol rush. It does have some lovely like spicy praline, nougat sort of notes in there with a bit of a pineapple zing. All right, let's give this a taste. I won't water this down. I'm going to taste it straight out of the bottle, and I'm not going to put my usual ice cube in there. Although I do have my lovely Glencairn glass pipette here that I'd love to use. But whew. Wow, I was drinking my whiskey with an ice cube straight up. I get that sort of guava, rock melon, fruit notes, leather almost. Wow. A taste of leather. It's a higher proof at 47.1%. That's the first sip. Let's have a second sip because second sip is very a little bit. I really get that. Oh, honestly, I swear to God, it's like a leather. I've got my Sullivans Cove. You probably can't see it. It's just out of shot there. I've got my Sullivans Cove whiskey saddlebag carrier there. It's a beautiful leather whiskey. It's a beautiful leather whiskey carrier. I don't know whether it's for your horse or your motorbike, but you put your bottle of Sullivans Cove in there, and it's got 2 glasses. Made in Tasmania, handmade, incredible quality, fantastic item. Thank you, Sullivans Cove, for that. I've got that leather tobacco taste on the palate there. I don't mind it actually. To be honest, you can see there's about a third of that bottle gone, and I've been drinking this and trying to like it, and I didn't like it. That's the truth. And I don't know whether it's the weather or today, or maybe I shouldn't put the ice cube in that particular whiskey. Just enjoy the flavours of a refill. It is softer than the usual Sullivans Cove, and I always thought Sullivans Cove, particularly the American Oak, which was actually my favourite more so than the French. I don't want to say overrated, but from when I drank it, just didn't live up to the hype. So many good whiskies out there, and you're paying top dollar. But this refill really works, and I wanted to like it, and I didn't. But now it's funny. I tried it. Maybe it's this Denver and Liley glass. Maybe that's the secret. Here I've been drinking it out of Glencairn glasses with a small ice cube in there. So maybe that's the wrong way to drink this whiskey. When you vanilla, I still get the oak is very restrained. Nowhere near as oaky as, say, the big brother or the side brother. Yeah, it's a lot softer, marshmallow. So get that like rock melon, or for the Americans, cantaloupe. Just that sort of fruit salad there in the back. I think I would say this, probably in the third of that bottle that I've drunk of that whiskey, I didn't sit down and really take the time to enjoy the nuances of the whiskey and really appreciate the fact that it is a refill and it's softer and more subtle. And you've got to go look at it, and you're not punched in the face by the oak or the vanilla or the tannins. I've enjoyed that. The finish, I mean, it's for Australian standards, it's higher proof than what we're used to, but I like it. It's a little bit thin on the finish, a little bit thin. You know, after some of the whiskies that I've had around here recently, I've had some of the Aaron big sherry dogs over there. You're sort of used to that long, strong finish. It's a little bit thin, but I don't mind that. It's like, you know, second fill, third fill tea bag. It's still, you know, enjoying the subtleties of the tea without that big tannic hit. So now, rating. Well, isn't that interesting? Because before I came in, I had a preconceived idea, you know, this is an 85, just hasn't lived up to, you know, the French cask or the American cask. Refills a poor cousin, poor brother. And now I just don't think that. I think you need to take the time to compare the differences between the first fills and the second fills. And you know, maybe get one of these Denver and Liley glasses and really just let the whiskey breathe and let the aromas seep out and air fill in there, and yeah, just appreciate that. So I before I was 85, and I'm 88 out of 100 for this whiskey. I don't know whether it matters whether it gives shit, but it's 85 or 88. But here in the whiskey library, we do get to try heaps of different whiskies. So I think it's, you know, not a bad gauge. So look, thank you for sitting through this review from you know, of Australian whiskey from an Australian. And maybe we should do more Australian whiskies. You probably can't see here off to the right, but there's 100 whiskies right there. If you're interested in seeing more reviews on Australian whiskey, please put in the comments below. Happy to do more, but at the end of the day, it's got to be about what you as a viewer want to see reviewed, and what whiskies you want to see open. We've got heaps, lots of you know, exclusive bottles that we're willing to open if the interest is there. So please comment below, and if you like the content that's being produced here, give us a thumbs up. Really appreciate it. It's Rock here from the Whiskey Library. Stay tuned for the next episode that we'll release out. And this review was on Sullivans Cove, second fill, American Oak. Cheers.